Hello and welcome to Pods Like Us. I'm Martin Quibell, known to my friends as Marv, and this time I'm speaking with Max from the podcast Bitches with Beards. There.
Hello.
Hey Max, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. And am I a friend? Can I call you Marv?
You can, of course. Yep.
Hi Marv. How are you doing?
It makes it less formal. Yes, I'm fine, thank you. At this time of the night, I'm okay. I feel like I'm at work.
And don't be mistaken, because it sounds like we're in the same country, but we're not.
I know.
I'm luckily 5 hours behind, so I just got back from work.
And it's beautiful and sunny where he is, and it's dark outside here.
I'm just there to make you feel jealous.
Yeah, Washington State at the moment, fantastic.
I put my thumb up. I forget we're on audio medium.
Yep, that's brilliant. People will be able to hear you put your thumb up. I don't know whether this is going to sound wrong or not, but I'm probably wrong in detecting a bit of a slight leftover British accent in there, or am I wrong?
Oh, it's definitely not leftover. I'm from Croydon.
Yeah.
I immigrated 7 years ago, but I just came back. I was there 2 weeks ago, so it's got a little bit strong. It got a bit topped up. Yeah, but no, I'm actually an expat.
Yeah, I thought so. So you've been back over here to visit, and you've sort of got the Cockney twinge back again. So, or would you always had that?
It never really went. My mum actually insisted it got stronger. I think the thing of Americans is that you have to lose the rhyming slang.
Yeah.
So I think my language, I sped my voice, because when I'm here, my voice is a lot slower. I'm very conscious of the wording that I use. And after coming back, my husband had to poke me and go, "You've gone full British, full Croydon, calm it down." And like walk into work and be like, "Oh," and they're like, "What the hell have you been? Just calm down." But yeah, no, so it gets worse when I'm in England, and it especially gets worse when my parents visit as well. So, but yeah, it's not going anywhere. And I see now I'm doing podcasting. It's my calling card on American podcasts. So got to differentiate between me and Daniel somehow.
Yeah, that's true. But at the same time, I mean, I found it over here. Then again, you're over in America, so you're used to it. But I know that over time, I've had to pull back on a lot of the colloquialisms that we have in the north of England, because I'll say things to American guests and guests in other countries, and they have no idea what I'm talking about, because I'll use like a word that I'm used to using. And so in a sense, I have to simplify what I'm saying in a way, and that's not meant as a nasty way of saying it. It's just that I've got to remember that I'm talking to people that have no idea and aren't the local people that I speak to in my everyday life.
But it's interesting because we've had it. So my husband's a sign language interpreter, which is why it comes up Jamie MSL interpreter for his this. So I married an American, but luckily someone that has that interpretation skill. But he'd say to me, like, I speak to Northern people over here, and he'd be like, I have no idea what they meant. And I went, well, they meant this, they meant that, they meant this. And he goes, oh, so you know that word? I said, no, but I use context. I hear tone. I think as Brits, we use a lot of context. So you could say something to me, and I would never have heard that phrase before, but I'll be like, well, he's talking about this and he's using this tone of voice. So I'm guessing he's talking about milking a cow, and so it's been quite interesting in that context. But no, you're right. You do. If I'm comfortable with people, I will use a lot of like slang. But at work, I work in a non-profit era, we work close with government. I have to be very careful. But then at the same time, they find me quite charming, which I don't get because I'm from Croydon, and they're like, "You sound so posh," and that phrase now makes my husband, he'll just cry laughing and go, "You've no idea where he grew up." Like, he's like, "No, he's not posh whatsoever."
Yeah, I've been to some lesser areas of London. We'll put it that way.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't live in Buckingham Palace, but let's put it like that.
The last time we went to London, we stayed in a hotel where when we got back, we found out that there was a murder by knife of 2 people the night before outside the front door.
Oh, God. Yeah, you get that. They like to cover it up. But the Brits like a little bit of a nasty murder sometimes, I think. Like my mum stayed in a hotel when we first moved out. Our apartment wasn't big enough for my mother, and she said her beauty products. So she stayed at a Hilton. And my husband was like, "Oh, that's we call that the Hinkley Hilton." And she's like, "Why is it called that?" She goes, oh, "Reagan was shot there." And Jamie was like, "Oh, my husband was very much like, what?" He goes, "What? Why is she excited?" And I went, "Well, because it's like it's what the Brits do. We love it. We love all that. It doesn't put us off." And Mum's like, "Oh, can I go and see what?" No, you can't go and see what happened. But it's our obsession. We're a very interesting species, the Brits, and I haven't appreciated that until I got over here. So I'm hoping I'm spreading that a little bit to the world.
But then again, I mean, you get some areas of America where you have something like that happen, and the photographers are there before the police arrive.
Yeah.
There's somebody dead outside this shop. Oh, I've got to photograph this and put it up on Instagram and Facebook. And somebody was shot outside such and such. No,
I can't. That it's weird, and I know this is what part of the interview is, but like I podcast, I discuss my week, I discuss culture, but I still think there's limits on how much you should share. And I'm like, that's I've just spent an hour talking about myself, but no, let's not film everything. That's just not needed.
So what's your history with podcasts then? Were you into podcasts before starting the show, or did it you just thought, oh, what's this podcasting thing? I'll have a go of it.
I got into podcasting. My first podcast was the RuPaul podcast years back, and I got into it when I got my first big job in the States after emigrating. And it was the job from hell, and I was miserable, and I sat there and I was like, okay, well, I know about this podcast, and I tried it out, and it gave me a lot of comfort, which it sounds like a little bit of a sad, depressing way to start, but I loved it. And I started that. And then also you start one podcast and they have guests, and then there's another podcast, and I became firmly podcast addicted. And then after I left that job, I ended up working in my present one for a like a global nonprofit as a videographer. But during the interview, they said, "Do you think you could do podcasting?" And I went, "Well, I know video audio." And by that point, I'd already met my co-host Daniel, who had his own podcast, and we bonded over that. I got some advice off him. I got some advice off some friends in England. And that got me producing podcasts with guests bigger than I deserve to have. I produced that for a couple of years and eventually decided that I wanted to do my own. I was kind of bored of sitting there producing political podcasts and wanted to actually talk crap myself and make it funny. And that's like sort of my short history of podcasting. But my actual original introduction to being behind the mic was, so Daniel, my wonderful co-host, he had his own true crime podcast.
Yep.
And I became a bit of a super fan, and that's how we became very good friends, because I kept on like giving him notes. I'm surprised actually we became friends because I kept giving him notes. But during the lockdown, obviously COVID was tough and true crime didn't really mix with people, and him and his co-hosts were very much like, we're not sure if we're going to carry on. Max, do you want to come and do some British stories with us? And so I did a couple of British serial killers and really enjoyed it. And that sort of got me going into thinking, you should develop your own podcast. And that's where the bug hit, and the bug hit very strong.
Yep. I mean, saying that, I mean, true crime is one of the biggest, listened to podcast around the world. we were discussing about crime before we started this recording.
Yeah,
but I mean, the interesting thing is that your show, because you're both from, you're both, yourself and your partner on the show are both gay. It's great, because then you're going into this, chat between two people from a different angle to a lot of shows. And the thing is that you're opening up the world, or you're helping. I think you help people a lot by talking about what's going on in that world, in the gay culture, and then just, but it's not in a way that's that puts people off. I think anybody can listen to it and get something from it. I just think it's fascinating.
I want to thank you for saying that, because one of the things that we wanted to do was, so we call ourselves Coastal Grandmas, which is the term for, I don't know if anyone here really doesn't know that, but it's like the Diane Keating sort of rich retirees who enjoy white wine without any form of liver disease and monetary cost. We decided that we wanted to have this attitude of, well, I mean, he's in his mid-30s, I'm in my late 30s. We're not outraging every night. We're not doing everything. But we feel that the sort of attitude to the gay scene is the very sweetie darling, we're here, we're there, this is what we're doing tonight. And we're like, no, we're tired. This is what real gay guys talk about. This is what we experience. And so thank you for noticing that, because we didn't want to gatekeep. We're not trying to gatekeep culture. We're just saying this is what we're observing, and I hope you find it funny how we talk about it.
Well, it definitely works. I mean, it's not, it definitely, I mean, I was fascinated. I mean, I'm going to keep listening, to be quite honest. I just found it really interesting that what you were talking about with that. And then in the first episode that I listened to, you were talking about, actually, you went into the subject of film, and I'm trying to remember what it was about. You were talking about your own history and learning about the film, your own history with film.
Yeah, that was so. They were quite fun episodes to do. So because we're a weekly culture podcast, unfortunately, we shoot ourselves in the foot in that we can't actually do too far ahead, because especially, and you would know this, Marv, as well, like way podcasting works is that, yes, we record on a Thursday, Friday, but we don't release till next Wednesday. So by the time there's such a jump ahead already that we can't record in too far ahead. So when we were on vacation, we both interviewed each other and we discussed our love of culture. And that's why my one is rapidly longer than Daniel's, because I like to talk culture. But no, film was my introduction to culture. I've always loved cinema, and it's something that if you get me talking about film, I will go into film language. I can talk about any film for about half an hour. So that for me was it. I enjoyed doing in that episode quite a bit, and I hope that it made people look at things in a different way. That's all we ask with this.
The other day, this is a tangent, I was looking at Twitter, and somebody posted something up, and they're on about the film Jaws, I think, and they posted a GIF that was, the scene in Jaws where they're on the beach, and Brody is sat on the chair, and he's got his wife Ellen at the back of him. And then it's the moment where he notices the shark, and you've got this camera shot. And I hadn't realised this. I mean, I've seen the film loads of times. It's one of my favourite films, Jaws. And it got this camera shot where it pulls out or whatever, but so the background pulls away, but they are still in the foreground of the shot. And then I sent as a message, as a response on Twitter, I put, I'd never realised until now, Steven Spielberg is doing the shot that Alfred Hitchcock essentially did in Vertigo. And I just found it fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the Vertigo shot, but it became the Peter Jackson shot because they used it when the ring waves appear in Fellowship of the Ring.
Yep.
So what they do is they track the camera forwards and then they zoom out at the same time. So it takes a lot. You have to ride with it. I've tried it with a Handycam and it does not work. But if you've got a full-on set, but no, that I love that style. And yeah, they use it when Brody sees. I think that's the horrible bit of the little kid on the lie low and it.
Yeah.
Then. So don't get me to one film. I will go. Jaws, that was a film that terrified me first of all, and my brother never went into the ocean for 5 years after watching that.
It's made better by the fact that the shark didn't work most of the time, because that creates the suspense.
Yeah, well, do you know who broke it?
No.
So that's Spielberg snuck Lucas and a couple of the others in to go look at this, what they've done, and they were playing with the shark and they broke it. Middle of the night, and they had to run off set, and the next day this person came up to Spielberg and went, "We're really sorry, Mr. Spielberg, but someone's broken your shark." And he's like, "No, who would do that?" So that's part of the reason why it was broken.
Well, he had George Lucas on set and Scorsese as well on set, because to people who follow film, there's the famous. I can't believe we're going into filming. There's the famous thing with the ending, where you get the ending as it is in the film, where Brody shoots the shark.
Yeah,
and that was actually a suggestion, apparently, from Scorsese, that they do that in the film. It wasn't in the original story by Benchley. I don't think Benchley actually liked that ending.
No. He stabbed the shark in the book, didn't he?
Yeah.
I think the idea was that. I think the studio also weren't happy with the stabbing because it's implied at the end of the book that the shark swims off, and they said we cannot finish this film with the implication there's still a shark out there. But no, it's quite an amazing film, and like the famous head shot, where the head comes out of the boat, was filmed in Spielberg's swimming pool, and they just filled it with milk, and it's quite it's interesting when we see a film as a large blockbuster. And this is what I find fascinating. 70s culture, the 70s filmmaking is fascinating, was that these were kind of real cribbed together films. And that's where my obsession with culture comes in, is that I just love that what we take for, I think it's, for me, of culture and film, it's like what we take for granted is actually like a really deep and layered story. And there's a narrative there within it, and that's why we have tangents, because we start thinking of stories and this and that. And Jaws isn't even one of my favorite films, but I know like 5 big stories from it, and my head is full of all this useless knowledge, but I can barely remember husband's name sometimes.
But yeah, I mean, it goes hand in hand. The world, as we continue to go from one decade to another, not only do the way that people behave and the culture and even the language and all sorts of things change among humans anyway, but so does film, so does all sorts of media, film, television. This is a media that suddenly got more, surprisingly, for saying that podcasting has been going since the mid to late 2000s. Yeah, it's amazing how it's where it is now, and it's taken that time to get there. But so the world will continue to do that. Whatever we're doing now, there'll be something. So film changes, the way that people film things, and the way that music changes, art changes. But something that I do like is the fact of, at the same time, you've got an almost nostalgia with all of this as well. And so you get things come back in a way. It's a bit like the Del Toro film that came out recently, where he's gone back to using stop motion. Yeah. And he's used some really good stop motion artists. I'll just shout out a friend of mine, Justin Rash, who's an incredible stop motion animator. And he was one of them that worked on that film. But that's also a good thing, because I think you need the practical in there and those sort of like fallbacks, so that we don't probably get too carried away with the modern technology. I don't know, really. Yeah, well, I mean, so I started off like studying visual effects, and I'm a videographer, but I use a lot of animation and motion graphics in my work, because I prefer that to filming sometimes. But I am a huge Star Wars fan. I mean, Marv, you can see behind me there's a Star Wars poster. Yeah. There's like Star Wars stuff
all littered about. But I love the practical side of things, and a big sign of that a couple months back, or I think it was maybe last year, was the film Marcel the Shell with Shoes, which was about a shell with shoes, but that was a stop motion character interacting in a real environment, and it had a very cute voice. But you can't tell me that half the appeal of that was the physicality. There wasn't that CGI sheen. You had this real innocent little shell that was moving about, and I think it does change things. And I think there's, as you say, there's such a nostalgia with film, is that, you know, don't tell me you don't get 1,000 thoughts in your head when you smell popcorn. You know, you get all these memories, and I still go to the cinema. I mention on the podcast a lot, once a week, because there's a cheap night at my local, and it's just that's my meditation. I go, my husband knows I'm there, so he knows not to buzz me. And if there's an emergency, obviously, but I can switch off, and I love that focused darkness. But also I feel that that's been consistent my whole life. And my parents took me from a young age, and it's just a way of reconnecting. And I love that about it. It's a chance to kind of all these memories coming back to you. And I think it's such a wonderful thing. And I would say definitely that would be a stepping stone to why I got into culture like I did.
Well, yeah, I mean, I found the same with cinema. I love going to the cinema and watching a film there, because there's a huge difference between that. Like you said, the lights go off and you're in that specific situation. When you watch a film at home, on your television set or your own systems at home, it's easy to get distracted by other things that are going on, and people will talk during a film, which is weird, because you'll go to watch a film with these people in the cinema and it's quiet. It's like a completely different thing altogether. So I think there's a magic to the cinema, and I really hope that it keeps going. I don't like the talk of people saying, oh, perhaps the end is near for cinema. I really hope that it gets back to what it was, in a way.
I personally don't think it is. I think that actually COVID probably reminded people why cinema is the actual format of cinema is so important. So if anything came from COVID, it is that we had so much taken away. We remind us what we wanted. So I'm with you. We cannot lose cinema.
Yeah.
I want to sit out there in the dark and watch the screen.
But we've also got the other problem now, that because of COVID and you've got these films going straight directly to streaming, it's given that problem where, I've got my slight issues with these people, these top directors saying, about the Marvel industry and all these sorts of films and superhero films, not real cinema, this and that. Of course it is real cinema, because technically Star Wars is what they say is a thrill ride of a film, essentially. The problem is, it's not with those films, it's with the studios now thinking, well, these are the films that make us the biggest amount of money. They're the ones that we'll put out there. These other films that don't make so much, we'll do this. But that's where they're going wrong, because sometimes going to a cinema and watching a film that's not one of these big blockbusters, you come out with, I mean, they do, a lot of the time you'll go and watch these and be like, wow, incredible, this, that, and the other. But these other films that you watch, the lower films that they're sometimes throwing directly to streaming, they're the ones that get this emotional impact from within you that has a completely different feel to a big blockbuster.
Yeah, no, I mean, so just before Christmas, I went to see with a friend, what was it called? Spoiler alert. And it's a gay romance with this part of the title is the hero dies at the end. And there may have only been 2 other people in the cinema, but to sit there focused on it, it was a small film. It was very intimate, but there was so we just sat and wept. I've never cried like that in a film before. It was really guttural, but it was, to be kind of in that public space as well. It made you it changed how you interact with it. And also, like before, a few weeks back, I went to see The Evil Dead, and I hadn't seen a horror film like that in the cinema for ages. And there was a stranger next to me virtually crawling into my lap, screaming, what was, and I was like, this is part of it. She's saying, sorry. And I was like, no, this is the culture, just scream away. And they said, no, we can't, there's a place for every film. And I think they just need to take more risks, and they're not. And that's we got to let them take more risks.
Yeah. But anyway, I'm just going to touch again quickly on the stop motion thing. What you were saying there about the movements, I know I was saying to somebody about Ray Harryhausen films. When I watch those films, because he's using stop motion and the very inhuman, the not very human motions that they're doing in a sense, because of the way that they do it, it adds a sort of creepiness and a bit of like otherworldliness to these darker characters, like the Medusa in Clash of the Titans, and then the skeletons in Jason and the Argonauts, and these sort of things. It's got that, it adds that sort of level to it, where I think CG, because it's trying to replicate the way that normal movement works, it's not got the same creepiness sort of factor.
Yeah, it's textures. And it's also a gravity that it really annoys me when you see like CGI fight scenes and they're flying about and you're like, can we add some gravity to this? Because at the moment you're pretty much going to float off screen. So I think that actually boundaries and limitations create a more effective movie. So I'm excited that they're recognizing it with Pinocchio and they're recognizing it with like Marcel. And I'm hoping that there's always going to be a time and a place for these traditional animations, and Disney found this. They went full CGI and then their films failed, and then they went done Princess and the Frog with a more traditional story and realized actually it wasn't the artistry. Their narrative was crap, and they went back to basics, and they're flying high again. So it always comes back to the traditions and the tried and tested methods, and we should never look away from those.
Absolutely. So are there any films that you think that are important to the gay culture, well, to LGBTQ plus, that you think that people should go out there and watch, that are, not, like I said earlier, they're not offensive or anything in any way, but they are important to get that culture across?
I think that for me, it's interesting that any film older than 5 years now you're going to find offensive in some way. I feel that our knowledge is changing so quickly. There's a lot of fantastic films out there. I think especially 70s and 80s has some very interesting ones. I can't think off the top of my head really some of the really the real powerful ones, but when they really started to when it started to become more mainstream. But definitely my biggest intro was The Birdcage. It's on top of my list of one of my favorite movies. I watched it with my parents because it was just a mainstream film that just so happened to feature a gay couple, but it's absolutely brilliant. The dinner party scene stands up, and I don't think anyone now can pick up a plate and go, ooh, it's like two boys playing leapfrog. I think is the most genius line. Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, if you really want a really good Australian movie, absolutely. Again, bitchy as hell, but absolutely genius, and looks exquisite because of the way it was shot. And then you've got the American equivalent to Wong Fu. Again, that's like you've seen Patrick Swayze, Wesley Snipes, John Leguizamo in full drag. And yes, were they drag queens? No, but there are drag queens in there, and it's was again a lot of people's introduction. I could list. Spoiler, definitely give it a watch if you. So I mentioned that one earlier. Down to something like Angels in America. Weekend is one of my personal favorites. It's a British movie. But if you really, really, really want a really, really good heartwarming one, I highly recommend the film Pride, about a true story of a group of gay activists who supported the Welsh miners during the mining strikes. It's based on a true story. It's got Imelda Staunton in it, Paddy Constantine. It's got a fantastic cast. And it's got the Andrew Scott's in it, and I can't remember. There's so many people, but it's really, really well done. I loved it. It will make you cry every time at the end in the best way possible. So highly recommend that. And that's a really good introduction to modern gay cinema, more mainstream. So yeah, that's my very quick rundown on gay movies. But have my contact information at the end. If you want to contact me, I'm sure I can recommend 1,000 other movies that will keep you busy through summer.
Yep. He'll always answer you when you send him a message on Twitter.
Will do, as long as it's nice, or even if it's nasty, probably. But yeah.
So, show history and description, we've sort of gone into that, would you agree? Or do you think there's any more to go into with that?
Well, the only thing I'd say about if our show history, how we actually ended up sitting down and doing it was, say, Daniel's show just started to wind down, and I was struggling. I was trying to produce my own podcast, and I'm still actually working on the same one, but I overcomplicate everything. So my little idea for one, which is I won't go into, but it got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And I was like, this is a lot for a first timer. And Daniel was like, this is a lot for a first timer. So but I really wanted to put something out there. And one night, and we bubbled with Daniel. So we were sitting there, we were having a glass of wine. I think it's probably a year and a half into COVID.
Yeah.
And we were sitting there, and my husband just looked at us and went, why don't you two just do what you're doing right now as a podcast? Just do it. Stop excuses. And that's how the Bitches and Beards came about, was that it was just Daniel and I at the end of a work week over probably our third glass of wine, talking in depth about a culture that does not deserve to have half an hour discussed about it. And we were like, okay, let's see if this is going to work as a podcast. And we're 16 episodes in, and I'm hoping it's working as a podcast.
It is, definitely is. But I mean, you're incredibly, what should I say? The title as well doesn't, you're not pulling back with the title either of the show.
Technically we are, because the original title, I suppose this is a exclusive, was actually Sloppy Bitches.
Okay.
And my husband said it was based on the French and Saunders sketch Lucky Bitches, where she played Joan Collins, which again not many people know about. And we would sit there and go to each other, Lucky Bitches. And sloppy is a term for just messy. And we were like, well, let's call ourselves the Sloppy Bitches. And my husband was really like, goes, I think you're going to regret that eventually. And eventually we came up with Bitches with Beards, which even then I was a little bit unsure. I didn't want people to think we're being derogatory. We didn't want to be nasty, but we refer to ourselves as bitches. So we kind of figure that's okay. But yeah, it's quite a blunt title. You don't really get many surprises once you've heard that.
No. It's like Freddie Mercury calling their band Queen.
Yeah, exactly.
So what sort of structure would you say that your show's got? Is there any structure to it, really? And do you do any scripting ahead?
So scripting, we make notes, but even today, I have an inclination to script and think. So when you sent me about, again, don't want to reveal too much, but I got sent the idea of the questions. I looked over, made sure I knew what it was, but I then stopped thinking, because if I think, I script, and that loses part of the magic. But we did have a structure. We sat down and we discussed what we wanted to talk about. Well, we knew what we did. So Daniel had started his older podcast always with a, what did you get up to this week? And we said, we're definitely going to have that. There's no way we're not going to, because that warms people up to us. We knew that we wanted to discuss the culture that we'd experienced. So books, any TV, film, and also we didn't want to be a news podcast, because there's so many of them out there and it's so bleak sometimes, especially in the gay community. So we said we wanted a little bit of an interesting news story, and then the main bulk of it would be what we thought the culture for the week had been. So we had a content list, and I think we roughly structured it at the start, and then we did 2 episodes that, as we joke, will never see the light of day.
Yeah.
But we worked hard. We went through it, and then we came back and went, okay, well, let's move this to here and that to there. And we can segue easily from this to that. So the structure, I think the structure came about by the 5th episode, but we do make sure we have it set. So I'm glad it sounds reasonably loose, but we like it structured, and it also keeps us on point, and it lets us take some breaks. But it's organized chaos. But no, we definitely have like set segments, and we know what it is. And I said, in terms of scripting, we have intro scripted, and still manage every time to muck it up.
Yeah.
The only thing we don't always tell each other is our intro line. So sometimes, we each have an intro line, and I've made Daniel laugh a couple of times by not telling him what my intro line was going to be. But we don't actually script lines. I might make a note of something that I think is funny to say, but I can guarantee I will miss it on my notes, and afterwards be like, oh, damn, I should have said that. But no, we try and keep it as flexible and as spontaneous as possible, because that's kind of that's the point of what we're trying to get across.
Yeah, I mean, essentially you're saying that you do similar to me, where I've not actually put out the questions in full. I tried that once, and it's just not the way to go for me. The way that I do it then is I do it with like bullet points. You get 2-3 words to sort of like lead to explain what we're going to be talking about. But that way it allows for conversation to be freer then, because you're thinking, well, how can I ask this? And it's not like you're reading a question ahead thinking, oh, well, I'm going to have to ask this question like this. You allow the conversation to flow, but all you do is just have these points written down in 2 or 3 words to make sure that you hit these marks, essentially.
Well, there's nothing kind of worse. And I don't suppose you've seen this or had this on your podcast, where a podcast is a conversation. And I said, the best reviews we've got are from, like, I've got from old university friends who have said, oh, it's like being back at uni with you. And that's really nice. Is that when someone lets their interviewee talk, and then they go, but they'll answer the question, but then the person's so set on their structure, they'll re-ask a question that's been answered because they don't know how to step. And you're like, you kind of got to let it flow. And I guess that's part of the skill as well. And I suppose you must have this. You've released so many episodes. I mean, when I looked at you, I was like, there's so many. Is that you must know now how to kind of get back to something or jump in or make it sound natural. But no, it's a skill. You can't plan out a skill. You have to learn, and I'm still learning as I'm going.
But it comes with time. I mean, you get used to it. The more that you do it, the more that you notice these little things, and you work out how it works. But I mean, how do you actually choose the topics then? The choices. How do you choose what you're going to discuss? And the fact is that, like you said, it's very of the moment when you're discussing these things.
Yeah.
So it's a bit like, so you must have had this thing then one week when you recorded a show the other week, and then, because I've not gone this far ahead yet, have you discussed, say, Tina Turner dying yet?
Yes. So the episode that came out today was Tina Turner. It's so weird. So we record on a Thursday. We said we would record on Thursdays, but we always end up recording Fridays now. I edit over the weekend, then spend 3 days panicking that I'm going to have nothing to talk about at all. And then a celebrity dies or something happens. So I don't want to say, this is going to sound really zen, and I hope people just don't think they're listening to a complete zen idiot at this point. It finds us. We keep an eye on stuff that's going on, like with news. I've just walked in. Hello. She's a bit needy. No, we let it. It's weird. Stuff will come along, and like if the news, we try and find interesting news stories. And I might be at, like at work, I might be at home, and I'll quickly like Google gay news, and I'll see what stories come up that appeal. But with culture, we don't gatekeep culture. That was one thing we never said we do. We're not, Patsy and Eddie picking what's next and what's the new thing. We see what's in the feeds, and me and Daniel will touch base the whole week and be like, anything yet? What are you feeling? What's going on? So about, I think this will probably come out after the episode we're recording on Friday, but the news stories that I don't think we've got news stories yet, but for definitely for culture, we're looking at, I know what it is. But one of the cultural pieces is going to be about people on dating sites who like to send messages but never ever intend to meet. And it sounds so weird, but Daniel's dating at the moment, and he's been finding that there's certain people that like to say, hi, let's get lunch sometime. Okay, let's get lunch. And they go quiet. So I said, do we want to do something about that? And he's like, yeah, I think we can have a good discussion about it. So that sort of came, and that was purely for a conversation that we'd had over the weekend that had been going around my head and saying, do you think there's a culture in people that like to feel involved but aren't involved? And yeah, it's very interesting. And so the other cultural piece, and Marv, hold on to your hat, this is going to be an intense one, is we're going to do a deep dive on Kylie's Padam Padam song.
Okay. Yep.
Because 2 weeks ago it came out, we're like, great, Kylie's got a new song. 2 weeks later, it's all over our feeds. There's GIFs, there's memes, and we're like, okay, we have to discuss why this has hit the big time. Why is Kylie thanking everyone? And it sounds like a really flaky subject, but it's what everyone's talking about. So, and we sort of sit there and do it. So as I said, it finds us. I said, when it comes to news stories, we sometimes have felt obligated. But we don't like to go too deep and dark. And other times I'll see a story and I'll go, yeah, that's my one for this week. Like the one that we just released today, the lady from the Pussycat Dolls is going to be in Sunset Boulevard, and we had a chat quickly about whether or not she'll be any good at it. It's that sort of thing, but it has to appeal, and it usually does. And I feel that, we like, well, is anything for this week? No, there isn't. And all of a sudden, say Tina Turner dies or someone else dies. Lily Savage dying was a big one. That was quite for me. And then that gave me a chance to talk to American audiences. And that week wrote itself. I did a bit of an explanation, and I put in like a 10-second clip of her at her very best, and hopefully shocked a few people.
That's good to know. I mean, celebrity deaths, it's the thing is, I mean, I mentioned Tina because of the fact of of how much of an influence she's had on culture. Yeah, completely. It's not like, just this person dies, that person dies, blah, blah, this, that, and the other. These certain, for want of a better term, icons in essence, who have that level that transcends just being a singer or whatever. They've got this thing to them. It's a bit like, Marilyn Monroe back in the day and James Dean. It's the same sort of thing. They've got this sort of status to them. So, I mean, that's the only reason why I mentioned that.
But for us, so her big resurgence came in, was it the late 80s? So I was born 85, which means her music was just the whole way through my childhood. You couldn't turn the radio on without, a song coming on, within an hour. And that for us was why it was more. I mean, she obviously went through hell and back to have her career, and that's something to be celebrated, and her influences to be celebrated on modern artists. But we kind of did it ourselves because our culture at a very base level was affected by her. And again, you can't but hear that the opening beat of Simply the Best, and it's Saturday afternoon and I can smell bolognese because my mum's cooking it in the kitchen for dinner. And so that's where we have the two levels of culture that we have. We pick stuff that's both influential but personal, and we hope that comes across in our conversations.
So what sort of research do you do leading up to it then? Once you've decided what topics you're going to discuss, how does the research go? Is it just like a general look at this and you've got the ideas in your head, or do you actually then go and write these notes down?
So we do our notes. That's usually our Wednesday, Thursday message to each other in the evening going, notes done. So we'll pick a topic we will for the news. I said we don't spend a long time on news, but we will do the cliff notes of the story and then have a quick chat. For research for the culture, we'll work out what the angle is that we want to attack it at, and then we'll probably do some research into make sure that what we talk about is accurate. But we research enough to make sure that we're not talking absolute bollocks, which probably we still do anyway.
Yeah.
But when we always said we're not really there to educate, we don't say anything that's false, but we mainly go quite quickly into our discussion. But so for this week with Kylie, I'll definitely be doing like an elevator pitch for her, just so people know, because a lot of Americans don't know that she was a soap star.
No.
And so they think that her career started with "I Can't Get You Out of My Head," and you're like, no. So we'll do a bit, but we're not an informative podcast, but we'll make sure that we're not saying any falsehoods. We'll structure it. I did a deep dive last week on a culture that's appearing in England called Hun culture. So I made sure I had some definitions. I broke it down. I read it out, but also leaving that room to have that discussion and to have that sort of that freedom to have that chat with your mate.
Now, I'm going to do a bit of self-promotion here. That's interesting what you said there about the British and the American is because, so I do another show, Toppermost of the Poppermost. And what that show does is there's three of us, two Americans, and then I'm the Brit. And we look at the US charts and the UK charts and what's going on from when the Beatles first hit the charts until they finish, until the career ends. And what we're looking at is how the charts differ and how culture differs between the UK and the US. But definitely music definitely is different towards the beginning. And then how it changes around the Beatles, how they inspire it, but then also how the Beatles are inspired by what's going on in both of those charts and any people that are connected to the Beatles. It's quite a full-on subject, actually. It's a hell of a lot of research, I will say. Yeah,
that's actually it sounds like we're quite lazy. So my own podcast that I'm developing is a very research heavy one, and around food. And Daniel did one about true crime, and I did a couple of episodes of Daniel's, and obviously I hadn't had the experience that he had coming into it. He'd done 150 episodes by that point.
Wow.
But it was a lot of work. And we said for this one that we wanted to explore, but we didn't want to be consumed by something that had to be researched heavily. Yep. And it wasn't a laziness. It was just like, we wanted this one to be fun with the potential of going somewhere. But no, when I know what you mean. I feel your pain when you say there's like some episodes are real heavy. You're like, what have I got myself into with this? Why do I do it to myself?
But luckily, the person who ends up doing the end edit, he goes through it minutely, and he's got like a fact check. He's almost fact checking every time that we'll say something. He's like, right, we'll get rid of that because you've got that a bit wrong there. Because we've put episodes out already where people are pulling us up on it and saying, look, you've got that wrong. It wasn't like that. That was wrong. And this was wrong. And it's like, okay, thank you.
How do you deal with that? It was interesting for me when I first put the podcast out, and I see friends message and say, oh, we like this, but your sound's a bit off. It sounds like Max is away from this. And it was very comfort and love, but it was also a weird one to suddenly, because you were like, oh God, yeah, this is a public product. How do you handle it when you have like that minute level?
I feel bad that you've said that, because I've put that in my blog that your sound was a bit quiet on the first episode. Both of your levels are really quiet. It's almost like you need to use a levelator to get the volume up on both.
And we do now, because someone got back and liked it enough, and we had to say to ourselves, they're rooting for us. They wouldn't. Yeah.
I was paying that much attention that I was like listening intently, and But dare I say, I handled that one with a bit of humour. So they were saying, oh, we've had this message from this person, and he said this and this and this, and it was basically just where we got it wrong. But it's a tricky one, because we're talking about an era where none of us were around.
Yeah.
Even Ed. I mean, he was young at that time. He's older than me, so he was around then. But he was too young to know what was going on, because I think he was born in the early 60s. So he wouldn't have known how it was. And this person was saying, look, you're not from that time. You don't know what the impact of all this, that, and the other was. And I sort of said, well, we know that. And I basically said, if you have any more points where we've been incorrect about anything or not quite got the right gist of what's going on at that time, please contact us if you want to on all these services. I've just left it open for them to do it. And then if they do that, we read out on a later episode, we just read it out and say, look, we made mistakes because, sometimes that happens. And this is what, this is how it really happened. Is this how this person's told us in this message?
But there's also conflicting stories. Let's face it, there's 3 sides to every story, your side, my side, and the truth. And I remember when I was at school, and it's always funny, people joke over here and say, well, you taught about the Beatles in music class. I'm like, yes, I was. And our teacher told us something, and I went home and told my mum, who was a huge Beatles fan, and she went, that wasn't how it happened. And then, and it happens. And it's sort of like, I think people forget that we're not carving stuff in stone as a podcast. And it is an interactivity, and we're open sometimes to having ourselves corrected and tails between legs, if you're lucky that we show that.
We didn't learn the Beatles when I was at school in music. I wish we did. But the interesting thing was, we had one of the teachers who was an English teacher, and he played guitar. And so that was my first initial introduction to guitar, was because he was a Beatles fan, and he used to have he kept all of his old Beatles monthly magazines from the 60s. So I used to just, because it was a boarding school, and I used to just go away and read these little monthly magazines that he'd got, and try not to destroy them in the process. But I'm glad that they do that now. Because I know I was talking to an English teacher, we've gone on to another tangent. I was talking to a teacher that I'm friends with who teaches music. And this is about 10 years ago, possibly a bit longer. And I was saying, my thing with music, I said, okay, we're having a basic conversation between us. And I said, the way I look at it is, if you made music more interesting for the pupils, I said, then you get more, the pupils will be more into it. I said, essentially, you've got to adapt what you're teaching them to what they're interested in, essentially. So I said, one way to look at it is, what you've got in contemporary music that they listen to now, and now that's influenced by or inspired by music from the past in essence. So you start at that level. You don't start at the, this is how they did it in the classical days, this, that, and the other. I said, no, in a way, it's better to go, because they're of this age, go from what's there now and almost go down the rabbit hole bit by bit, incrementally, to take them back.
With Lizzo and the flute that happens, and that was a big cultural thing, was when Lizzo was, I forgot whose flute it was, but she performed in DC, and they let her use a very old presidential flute. And there, obviously, everyone was up in arms. How dare she? How dare she? And then all these teachers got back and said, yeah, the next day at school, all these kids were asking about, the history of the flute, the history of the president. And one teacher said, no, we stopped the lesson and said, to hell with the curriculum for the next hour. Let's have a discussion about this. And, how dare, it's like, this is it. Culture has its place. And it's like, well, these kids now are interested in something. Let them be interested. Let them engage. It's like, yeah, that's me.
It's good. Going back to film, it's a bit like with film where you mentioned about Peter Jackson using that shot. And in essence, if you make it a film that's of the time, and then you say to people, well, this camera angle or this shot that they've used there, they've based that on this, that was based on that was based on that. And then you get the history of film. Because it worries me in a way where you've got a lot of younger people, and these films that are, they are important films in history in a sense, but they don't know them because they just see any film before a certain age as being, oh, that's an old film. you even see people who watch films from the 80s and go, oh, I've watched this oldie from the 80s or the 90s, and you'll think, okay, you've missed really great films before then as well, like the Leone films and these other films that were before that, and the Hitchcocks. You've missed all these only starting at that era.
I think though a lot of it is they're so inundated with like media and culture and content at the moment that there is just, whereas when I was a kid, my parents would record off the TV. They just keep an eye on the TV, TV guide, record films off the TV, and that'll be our Saturday night. And we watched a lot of old films because we went to the cinema once every holiday. You would go and watch a film, or we would watch we didn't have a lot of VHSs. They were really expensive, so
they were.
We relied on older films. But now I feel there's so much coming in that there's no need to leave the garden for other food, because there's so much fruit in this garden. It's like, no, leave, go explore, see other stuff. And it's just, I don't think there's a need at the moment to explore the past, and I feel that is sadly something that we need to kind of regain with people.
But I think the streaming platforms aren't helping with that either, because you'll go to a streaming platform and you can't find any of these old films unless you pay a ridiculous amount of money to basically buy a digital copy of it, which I think is also something where they're going wrong, especially when you've got companies like Amazon have bought MGM. And I mean, MGM, I've got some incredible films in their back catalogue that they're just not touching on Amazon at all.
They're the ultimate back catalogue. It's ridiculous. No, I do agree. And I also feel there's a lot of films that I haven't seen, and they just weren't on TV when I was a kid. So I'm starting to kind of re-explore a lot of stuff, especially my husband's away for work a bit. So I'll just have a weekend of just watching movies. And that for me feels like a weekend well spent. But I'll pick stuff out that I've never seen, or I'll make a note on my phone and be like, you have to find this and you have to watch it. Like Woody Allen's, I know, very controversial subject with him, but Hannah and Her Sisters I'd never seen. I was like, but I really wanted to sit down and watch it, and it's interesting. But I feel as well is because streaming services bombard us. When you go on, you turn it on, you get a trailer straight away, you get this straight away, you get trending straight away. So just because everyone has decided to watch something means the algorithm is now pushing something at you, and you think, okay, well, I'll watch that. Oh, why did I come on here? Oh, that's gone out your head. That's way forgotten. The film that you thought about watching, because enough people push an algorithm for you to be confronted by Cake Wars. And, that's what you're watching. Sorry, Veronica Lake, your classic I Married a Witch is in the past now. We're down to, let's see who can burn a Victoria sponge.
Shout out to Nailed It on Netflix.
I do like Nailed It and Bake Off, but that's about as far as we go.
Well, the winner with Nailed It is the attitude of Nicole, who's the
lovely Nicole.
Yes, because she doesn't hold anything back.
No, she's perfect for that. But that she was another one actually that everyone says Nailed It, but she had a podcast way before Nailed It came out, and it's a weekly staple. It's my end of week joy at the moment. But yeah, she's another one. She has a whole rich career, and she's like, I just do this thing now that she has actually, I think Nailed It's actually not happening anymore because there was strikes, but
okay.
But that's why the last season was short. I say again, this is me. I have a brain full of useless facts, and I need to work out how to use it properly.
But she's even less held back on the podcast than she is with Nailed It. Nailed It is edited.
Boy, is she not held back on that podcast.
No, she does not. So show music and show logo. You created the logo then, which is great. Yes. It reminds me of almost like those, are they Funko Pops or whatever, where you don't get the full face, you just get like the specific, like you'll get the glasses, or you'll get the eyebrows and then the beard, but you don't get the eyes or the mouth or the nose.
Yeah, I wanted to So Daniel, like we both have limitations in terms of how much that we put ourselves out there, and Daniel, like he has a big division between the podcast and his life, whereas I'm more engaged in the social medias, and so photos were not going to happen. But I came up with it. I said, how about let me try something, and I said I'll do silhouettes of us, and that's worked really well. So you can recognize us, and I've had people come up to me, friends that when I was over in England a couple of weeks back, and going, "Oh, we've lost a podcast, and who do you get to design your graphics?" I'm like, "It was me. I just know how to use Illustrator." But then I made the mistake of, on a weekly basis, I started creating silly graphics to go with each episode, and it's got more and more extreme with each one. And I have to find basic weeks. So I don't know if you've noticed, like for our British episode, it was a Union Jack, and then one episode involved us in a ski accident. And it was after that I said maybe each other week that I go a bit extreme. But the logo has been really important to me. I feel that I use the word gatekeep a lot. Yeah. I think there's a lot of people out there saying how podcasts should be done. For me, it was important, but I don't judge based on the logo. But for me, I was like, I really want a solid logo. And it made me relax a lot more about the first impressions the podcast was making. Because I don't know about you when you started this one, but you panicked so much about so many little technical details. Just to have a solid logo meant I was like, okay, I'm making a solid first impression. At least they'll start listening. Hopefully they'll start laughing.
Oh, God, and the amount of time it takes to come up with a title.
Of each episode. Oh.
No, just in general for the podcast itself. You go through, a lot of people go through. So I went through so many different sort of thoughts of title. I'm thinking, should I call it this? No, that sounds terrible. This sounds terrible. No, don't like that. Somebody's got that one. Oh, dear. But yeah.
Yeah, we had to. I mentioned earlier what our process was, and we knew roughly what it was going to be. But even then, and that'll be like the way I would do it in future is do the podcast and see how it actually feels. And I guess it's like people that try and name a baby. They're like, well, let's hold it and see what name comes to mind. So yeah, podcasts are babies. You have to wait for them to be born for them to sometimes pick a name for it.
The show music then, is that have you got that from somewhere else? Actually, you know what, I forgot this completely. The show logo, the other good thing about the logo is, so you've got those two pictures of you, and I haven't put this in mine because I haven't got coloured pens, but it's not in your face, but the use of the rainbow colours in the background as well is perfect. It tells you what it is without it being, like I said, it's comfortable. Like the show is comfortable. It's not in your face in any way, with any part of the package at all. It's just a nice, comfortable. It is the best thing in a sense. Just listening to two friends, as we say in the UK, just gabbing, just talking with each other.
Yeah, we had that thing. Obviously, both being gay, that a lot of our culture that we receive is gay, but we also, like this week's episode, I discussed the Star Wars hotel ending because I think that's a cultural thing. A $5,000 a night, whatever, hotel failing, great. Disney, wake up to the sign of the times. But we did want to have an element of gay culture in there, but we didn't want to have a huge flag in the background, and it just looked very generic. And we wanted to stand out. So I looked and we found this like rainbow, which it was a very 70s muted pattern.
Yeah.
And we kind of felt that again, let's say going back to the coastal grandmas, that we're that little bit more mature. The muted nature, said the comfortable muted nature was to say, this is not an in your face, hey, we're hip podcast. We're like, nah, we've got some slippers on while we do this. But in my head, I see it like the old 70s sitcoms from England, especially, like, was it The Good Life, and that real muted look to them. I like, no, that's where my culture began. That's why I wanted to start this off with.
Where you look at those old shows from the 70s that we had in the UK, and they've got a certain look to the film of it as well, haven't they? Where it's like, it's not that well processed. It's maybe slightly grainy, even when you've cleaned it up. There's still that almost sepia look to it.
And then when he said, like, in the audience was one thing, but when he said take it outside, like, especially in The Good Life, you used to have to go outside to the garden. It was like all of a sudden, it was like there's fog everywhere. But just how it was, wasn't it? Like the complete picture quality sound would change, and I loved it.
Absolutely. So have you got, I mean, I know you've only been going for 16 episodes, I think, but have you got a standout episode so far, or a standout subject where you think, wow, we really hit that well?
Definitely. Okay, so I will say that episode 16, which came out today, is perfect in my eyes, purely because I feel that we really hit our stride. We got it in under the hour. I don't know what it was. We just fired on all cylinders. And I think because we've done it last few weeks, we've had some vacations. We've been learning as we're going. And I just was so proud of this particular episode. But my baby, my favorite one, and I'll have to quickly get I can never remember what number it is, but I will have to direct people, is episode 8, My Egg.
Okay.
Because we start with this in that every so often a story comes about as if it was made for our podcast, and it was Gwyneth Paltrow and that damn court case.
Yep.
And so the week before, we sometimes do a thing where the other one will hear a story but not know what they're talking about. So I'll text Daniel and go, I keep hearing Gwyneth Paltrow get mentioned. Can you research that for me and then tell me the story back? And it's worked a couple of times. We interchanged that segment. And he told me this story about Gwyneth Paltrow, and it was episode 7. And then the next week it just blew up. So couldn't quite believe that we had the queen of all generic self-help culture in a ski accident. It was like chef's kiss. And we had such we sat down before and said, look, we have got to discuss this. We said, was it hold the front page, clear the presses, whatever. And the funnies, and we had such a good time doing it because we printed out all the court transcripts and read them as if it was a romance, because it was her and the lawyer and we put music in the background, and it was just and I think the husband came at one point and we let him sit and listen to it. He was like having a drink as well, and we were all giggling, and I started to direct Daniel, and I was like, make this bit more, be like, yes, more breathy. And for us, I think that was that episode where we knew that we were onto something, and we just had so much fun. And I think there was tears coming down our faces at some point. And we've tried that since. And I think 2 episodes ago, we did another one where my cousin, I went to visit him in Edinburgh, Scotland, and he came back. He said he was told us about something that happened at his office party, and it hit the newspapers. So we found the story, and my husband does a really good Scottish accent. So we got him to read it in his Scottish. I never told Daniel. I said, Daniel, we're going to read you a story. And we were just absolutely in tears by it. And it was sound like Mrs. Doubtfire reading it. So that's episode 15. Definitely give that one a go as well. It's about an hour in if you do want to skip, but please don't. But trust me, it's really worth this story because we are just having the best time. But there will be the 2 episodes. Yeah, episode 8, though, definitely the Gwyneth Paltrow story. We try and make like so petty, so relevant, because it kind of was in the end, but it was just where we knew we were on the right track with the podcast.
Well, there's all sorts of things going on in the world at the moment. It must be really difficult to choose what not to talk about.
Yeah, we do. I mean, we did the coronation, we did Eurovision, because that's just, I was over there for that. 2 weeks' time, we've got Pride in DC, so we're going to do a whole episode on that. But just for now, own, again, slightly cynical. We don't like to be too cynical, and we especially said early on we weren't going to be mean. But so if we have nothing nice to say, unless it's like what's going on in Florida, unless it's like we will be overly positive. But no, sometimes we have to work out where to put everything. I'm afraid this week the Little Mermaid live actions got relegated to weekly catch up.
I'm really sorry about that, Disney. You just
Sorry,
not hit the
Disney.
mark.
You'll see a drop, Marv. You're going to go look now this week and see a drop in the profits because we didn't mention it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Disney will be going bankrupt in no time.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, right. What do I mean by life advice tip? I've got no idea what I mean by number 9, life advice tip.
Don't do podcasts. I think no.
Don't give yourself too much to do. Sometimes,
I honestly, that would be my life advice. I am someone that really likes to over volunteer. Well, not really volunteer as much, but I always find I have 1,000 things to do. And actually, this podcast has been. It is a responsibility, and I feel that once you start it, you definitely have to continue. We release weekly, which is intense. We've managed to get our schedules, and we're very good friends. We're very honest with each other. If we can't miss a week, we have to delay a couple of days, which we've done once, which was not fun. But we're very honest, and we're able to keep this up. But no, once you start a podcast, it's like you really have to. You feel like you owe your audience if they're going to invest in you. So don't overinvest your time if you don't have time to do a podcast.
Well, that falls into the next one, doesn't it? That podcast advice. Don't
start a podcast if you want to make money.
Absolutely. No, do not do that.
I saw that question. I thought it was a good one. I said I'm a bit of an audio engineer. I do it through film, but we use a snowball mic and we do it in the kitchen and we just about manage to keep it together. I would say if you're going to start a podcast, obviously make sure that people can understand you and your levels are clear.
Yeah.
But I don't know if this is something you've ever said. I hope I'm not going to offend you, but there's a lot of people that like to say you have to spend a lot of money and don't do it if your mic's about. Have fun, start it, see if you like it or not. Practice, fail, come back again. It's just have fun. And if it stops being fun, stop doing it. Daniel and I get together once a week, and if we didn't have the mics in front of us, we'd still be talking this crap. So, I actually look forward to it. It's quite eventful. So, have fun. Don't worry about what people think unless they obviously start to give you honestly good advice about how to better your product.
Well, I'm only using this mic and the equipment I use because I already owned it before I started.
Yeah. I'm really annoyed because I've got all this great equipment at work and I'm almost like, you can't do it. I, for the record, have never touched it, but I'm always going, there's a whole studio. And I'm there here's my lovely little mic, my headphones.
It works. It's great, but so what do you like to listen to in the world of podcasting?
I listen to way too many podcasts. So I went away for 2 weeks and it's probably going to take me about a month to play catch up. Yeah. But I like a podcast I like a Trojan Horse podcast. So I started when yours came up on my feed, I started to listen to it. And thanks to your last episode, I'm now very nostalgic about Christmas because I like a podcast that is about one thing, but you learn about something else. So my all-time favorite is Grace Dent, who's a food critic, does one called Comfort Eating.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful podcast, and I think she's got a lovely voice anyway. I think she's the only person I know that can eat on a podcast that doesn't make me feel sick, quite frankly.
That's good.
But her podcast, for those who haven't listened to it, is probably a few people. She's a food critic in England and a restaurant critic, and she invites any guest on. They come in with a food they enjoy as a comfort food, and then she talks about their lives, but uses food as a source. So she'll ask them why they like this comfort food, or then she'll say, "Oh, you were born here. What was food like? How much food?" She always roots it back to food, but she somehow has these in-depth interviews, and it's the same with. I say Brett Goldstein's one about films to be buried with. He talks about film, but you find out so much about people. Alan Carr does one about travel. But again, I like that sort of look over here, but while I'm distracting you, you're going to reveal so much about yourself. And so I think definitely that my favorite style of podcast is where you go in and don't expect to learn so much. But definitely, I'd say Grace Dent's one is the epitome of like what I'd always like to reach in a podcast.
Yep. I've not checked the others out, I'll be honest, but I have checked out Films to be Buried With. That is a great show.
Oh, it is. He said he was going to end it at one point. I said, don't you dare. Who has got a really good one is Joe Brand now does one about death. Not Joe Brand. Kathy Burke.
Yes.
So that's my lovely dog Rory, but she's deaf, ironically, so she can't hear my podcast. But no, so just I like anything that's about something but takes you on another line.
You know, I'm looking for something now. Where have I put that book? There's one I've started listening to actually that is a guy, and I think it's incredibly brave, and I can't for the life of me remember it. But he's going through the story of his mother has got Alzheimer's. Yeah. And he's discussing about his first episode discusses what she was like beforehand, and then the extreme difference because of the lockdown and how she was after the lockdown was lifted and he was able to visit her and how different she was afterwards and that. And I think it's an incredibly brave program, but also fascinating. I mean, it touches me because my own mother's got Alzheimer's. So, I mean, it sort of like speaks to me, but there's a load of really good podcasts out at the moment, to be honest.
There is. I'm sorry about your mother, but there's a really good one called Dying for Sex. That was a limited one, and I think it won Podcast of the Year. And that was about a lady that found out she was terminally ill with cancer, and she divorced her husband and decided to spend the remains of her days having a lot of sex. And it was a really, really good one. It was so well done. And the last episode really had me in tears, and you knew what was going to happen, you know, and it was done very well. But no, I think podcasting is it's a very oversaturated, but it's a very special medium. And I think that there's a lot of good stuff out there. So recommend.
Absolutely. I always say that there's that many podcasts out there. There'll be something there for you if you keep checking them out.
Exactly.
There might be thousands of film podcasts out there, but they're not all 100% the same because the presenters make the shows different.
Yeah, and it's finding that right angle with it. And I probably wouldn't listen to a review podcast as much. I like classical podcasts because it depends what you can keep up with and that. But no, there's a lot of good film podcasts out there, and it's about making sure. And I think that comes back to advice: is what is your unique selling point? You know, don't just come on and I guess discuss I'm going to do film reviews. It's great, but there's a lot of that and a lot of people who are paid to do that can do it a lot quicker and a lot more efficiently. So if you can do one review a week, why is it funny? And I think that's something that a lot of people are starting to find, and it's really great. People are finding their voice.
Yeah, the film ones, I mean, like a lot of shows where you've got many people as you know on the shows, what attracts me to them isn't always necessarily the subject that they're talking to. I mean, it pulls me into a degree.
Yeah,
I like a podcast where you get difference of opinion sometimes, and that's where it makes it interesting because it's conversation and it's real. Where one person will come at the subject from one angle, and one will come at it from another angle, and each person adds spice to that show.
Yeah, we're like that's why we're hoping at one point, and me and Daniel, that we're going to have not an on-air argument or something. But unfortunately, we're kind of joined at the hip a little bit, which might be the downfall of the podcast because we never ever disagree. But I think if me and the husband had a podcast together, we'd probably make it a little bit more interesting. We always kind of come from a different end of things.
That reminds me of a podcast once where they got their partners to actually be the host as a one-off.
That could be interesting. I think that there's stuff in that, but I believe in a separation of church and state, as they say. So I'll just stick with my best mate and some wine.
That's a good idea. So where can people find you and get in touch with you?
Well, we are on most major platforms. We are on, obviously, Apple Podcasts, Spotify as Bitches with Beards. I am going to obviously get up now quickly our Instagram, because that is run by Daniel. And our Instagram is Bitches W Beards the Pod. And if anyone on Twitter, we are Bitches with Beards, or it's Max J Sycamore. That's Sycamore spelled like the tree. And please welcome to say hi on Twitter. That's more my personal, but I do enjoy discussing and meeting people through that. As long as you're nice, no Twitter trolls, please. That's so last year.
I've just looked at that, and you have an incredible image on Instagram of. Let's have a look.
Oh, Daniel's cruising one.
The Titanic one. Yeah.
My favourite.
That's hilarious.
That was one week that it took me about 2 hours to do. And I was like, no, we're not doing this every week. And I think the next week was us in front of the Union Jack.
Much easier.
Much easier.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, I mean, with that picture there, you may end up getting James Cameron asking you if you want to be in a version of that film.
He might give me if he gets me like insight into like Avatar 3 or something, then, I'll be that, give my cultural views on I can't remember what the alien species are, but no, it's nice to get some attention. My favorite graphic actually out of all of them was the Bud Light one, because like that was a bit of a serious conversation that week, and it was funny just to put our faces on the Bud Light cans and just say, really?
Yeah. That's brilliant. I was going to go somewhere with that, but I don't want to embarrass somebody that we did a picture of. We put my older brother, one of my older brother's face on top of something. But we're not going to.
It's an audio medium. We'll leave it for the visuals.
Anyway, thanks for speaking with me today, Max.
Thank you for having me on. We're just a baby podcast, but we're growing strong. So hopefully, people come say hi.
Well, I already know a couple of people who are interested in listening to this and hearing the discussion. So you've got people out there in the podcasting world that follow you.
Perfect. That's wonderful. I said, and good luck with this podcast. I can't quite, but I mean, say good luck. You are so many episodes in. I hope we get to where you are.
I made the mistake when I started of trying to release twice weekly.
No.
Yes. And then I tried that for a while, and then eventually I can't do this. I really can't do twice a week.
No. Oh, no.
Respect to those that do it every day.
Oh, God. Yeah, well, they usually pay to do it. Did I say that? Can't make money for podcasts. Yes, you can. But no, hopefully I'll be back in a couple of years to say hi, and hopefully I'll still be doing this.
That's a good idea. I've got people from 2 years ago asking to come back to do an update. It's a good idea. Yeah.
Just going to come and scream into the mic of a primal scream probably and go, why?
Eventually go all meta and have a show where I do where I listen to my own episodes back and do a commentary track, maybe.
Oh, that's the second episode a week then. That's a bonus episode.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Anyway, thanks for speaking with me today.
Thank you for having me on. Have a good one. Enjoy. I'll go to sleep now.
Yes. Yeah. I'm obviously tired because I've just repeated that thing twice there. So anyway, you can find Pods Like Us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok just by looking for Pods Like Us, because it is basically the address /Pods Like Us on all of those. And we are available through podslikeus@gmail.com. And you can also go to Patreon as well. I've got a Patreon page that, there's extra footage and stuff goes on there as well. Anyway, thank you everyone for listening, and hope you listen again to another episode of Pods Like Us.